Hello, everyone. Welcome back to season 5 of the Digital Adoption Show. We are thrilled to have you with us. If you missed our opening episode, make sure to give it a listen because we are only getting started. I'm your host, Mayank Arora, Senior Customer Success Manager at WhatFix, and I can't wait to dive into today's conversation with you all. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on our insightful and thought provoking episodes. Today, we are tackling a hot topic in tech and business world leading through AI and automation without losing the human touch. It's a critical conversation, and to help us navigate it, I'm honored to introduce our guest, Christopher Lin. Chris isn't just another voice in digital transformation. He's a seasoned leader who's been at forefront of blending technology with human-centric strategies. As the executive advisor for business transformation at Christopher Lin Company, he helps organizations overcome toughest challenges where people, performance, and technologies intersect. His innovative approach pairs cutting-edge solutions with deep respect for the human element, proving that you don't have to choose between operation excellence and genuine employee engagement. Beyond his advice, Chris is the host of Future Focused, a platform dedicated to exploring how technology our lives and work. He serves on advisory boards like HR.com and has spent years helping global organizations leverage AI and automation to uplift their teams rather than undercut them. And if that wasn't impressive enough, Chris is also a devoted father of faith. Congratulations, Chris. Chris,
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have you with us.
I'm looking
Your
forward to it.
insight.
I always enjoy these conversations. So whether we're talking about being a dad of 8 or digital transformation or AI, actually they're all interconnected anyway. So it's just a fun conversation. So I'm looking forward to chatting.
Likewise, Chris, likewise. And before we dive into any heavy topics, we've got something fun lined up. So this season, we are kicking off our chats with a quick this or that game. It's
Okay.
a lighthearted way for me to know you beyond the boardrooms and webinars, right?
Got it.
So, Chris, are you ready to get started?
I am always ready for fun. So let's do it.
Perfect. So here's my first question. It's going to be rapid fire, so I'm going to throw next one right after. First question: morning runs or late night brainstorming?
Late night for sure. I'm definitely a late night person.
Oh, that makes us two. That's the two of those. So,
Yep.
audiobooks or long form content?
Ooh, good one. Probably more long form content. That's probably more my jam.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing, right? Remote teams or on site huddles?
So anybody who's followed me for very long knows I am the remote guy, big time. So I'll go on site if absolutely I have to, but actually most people that I know have actually never physically met me. So that's my that's part of my brand.
Got that, got that. Okay. Virtual reality training or classic classroom workshop? Based on your previous answer, I can make a guess, but you go ahead.
Oh, you know what? I actually don't know that I would ever be able to say this or that with that one because to me, I think there is a world where both actually fit together really well. So I'd say that one, I would go with both and.
Fair. And when I was in San Francisco earlier this year, I sat in a Waymo, which is like a fully automated taxi.
Yeah.
So I have a question around that. So a perfectly automated coffee machine or a barista who knows your name and your story?
I'm always nuanced in my answers on this. This is why when people are like, Christopher, what's your favorite? I'm like, it depends. It honestly, for me in that one, would depend on the day and what I was trying to accomplish because the human interaction with someone, to me, even though I may not be a big fan of in-person stuff all the time, when they happen, I cherish them. And there would absolutely be times when I would much rather sit and engage in meaningful dialogue with a barista who handcrafts me the exact coffee that I want. Um, and then there'd be days where I'm like, I gotta go. I don't have time for this. I just need my thing so I can get out the door. And I think it's again a both and situation.
So you did not pick a side there. No problem. That was awesome. Now that we've had some little fun, let's dive into the heart of today's conversation. So, Chris, why don't you first start by sharing your journey with us?
Yeah, so I've got a quirky journey. So to give a little bit of background, I grew up in a funeral home, and I share that for context because a lot of times people are like, what an interesting background. But you'll see the trajectory of my life. It has very much shaped who I am because while a lot of people don't like to think about death, I actually think about it a lot. And so it actually drives a lot of the decisions that I make because I'm keenly aware of the fact that tomorrow's never guaranteed. And so even growing up, I was very technical. I had a computer before people had computers. And so everybody was like, Christopher, you need to go be a software engineer. You got to do this. And so I did, but I didn't love it. I could do it, but I didn't love it. I loved how technology was changing people. And then going back to this whole funeral side, instead of going, that's what everybody told me, so I'll just do it because I went, no, I'm not going to, but I don't quite know what that is yet. And so I ended up taking some advice from one of my counselors on doing, which I to me felt odd, but they thought, you know what, you're really good with technology. Why not teach people how to use technology? And I thought that makes enough sense until I spent a bunch of time and actually finished my degrees in education. And I went, but this isn't really how people learn. So then I again went, this isn't what I'm going to do. And so
Mhm.
that's how I ended up not going the computer programming route, not going the traditional academia route, but actually threading this needle of I was the person that business leaders contacted when they said, we have this really impossible challenge. We know we could be doing better with technology, but we have people that have to pull this off. So how do we do it? And that's why I say I bridge business tech and human experience in that that is my sweet spot. That's my genius zone. And so that's led me, if you look at my LinkedIn, you'd be like, oh, but you've always been a learning person. And I say learning's a side effect of the work I do, which is really driving those business outcomes with tech, bringing people along for the ride.
Interesting
Yeah.
background, Chris. And since you've mentioned your learning as a profession doesn't only define you, so let's start with my first question. I'm sure you've
Sure.
heard this before. You juggle so many roles, hosting a podcast, running a
Yeah.
newsletter. I can never commit myself to even reading it, let alone writing. And then you advise organizations on transformation, reading, writing, and so much more. So instead of telling us how you manage it all, could you explain why you choose to do these things? What deeper
Yeah.
purpose or set of values drive you to keep going, even when it gets tough? Because sometimes you just don't feel like doing it on a regular basis. So how do
Yeah. So it's a complicated mix of things, but one of the things that has always mattered to me is I see people, organizations, it's always frustrated me when I see people making unnecessarily difficult paths. I see people going down paths and I go, what? It doesn't have to be that hard. It can be better. There is a better way to do it. And that just, I can't extinguish that fire and it just drives me bonkers. And but I understand that for a lot of people, they struggle to see it. And for me, for whatever reason, I can see things that sometimes other people are like, how on earth did you put those two together? And I'm like, I don't know. But rather than keep that for myself, I'm like, I would rather give everything I can to try and help people see things differently because there is a better way forward. And so that's actually what drives me to do my stuff is I'm like, I can't possibly help everybody. It was funny. I remember growing up in one of my classes, one of my college professors was like, Christopher, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I remember saying, I want to change the world. I just don't know how yet. And that is part of what drives some of this stuff is I'm like, I know I only have so much capacity, but I know there are ways I can put things out there that hopefully help encourage, inspire, and educate people to do things differently. And so that's what drives me. And then I think the other piece is being a dad of eight, the decisions we're making today are going to affect the generations to come. And so being a dad of eight, I'm like, I want us making good, wise decisions about where we're going with tech, the way we think about work, because it's my kids and my grandkids and my great grandkids that are going to have to face the decisions we make. And so I'm deeply committed to going, then we better make the right ones because I've seen what happens. I'm also a big fan of history. I've seen what happens and the effect it has on people for centuries when you make stupid mistakes. And especially right now, as I look at AI and what we're doing, I'm like, we have we run the risk of making some very foolish mistakes right now. So that's what keeps me going on the days when I'm like, ah, I'm busy. Do I really have time to do this right now? I'm like, yes, I do. It's more important than whatever else I have going on.
Wow. Very moving, Chris, actually. And part of what you said, where how the decisions you're going to take are going to affect your future generations. I don't think so many people think about that, right? As deeply how you mentioned, because especially when you're young, you think life goes on, go with the flow. But yeah, that also brings me to my next question. Is there a particular experience in your life that made you realize that your drive goes beyond your professional ambition?
So I think one, there's a lot of them, but one in particular that I remember was as I was looking at my trajectory and my career stuff and figuring out what I was going to do, I'd been told early in my career, if you're going to achieve a certain professional milestone, you have to jump through XYZ hoops. Like at some point, you will have to do this. And I remember one of the first chief learning officer offers I got was from a company I never thought would ever offer me a job with more zeros than I ever thought would ever be offered to me. And I remember looking at it and going, but what is being asked of me is something that is, it's too much. Like, it's not the right path. It's putting me in this position of choosing between my family or my career. And I've spent my whole life going, you don't have to make this choice. It's an arbitrary choice. But here I was faced with it going, is this really it? Is this where you end up at some point? And I remember going, no, I'm not buying into this. And I remember turning down the offer and going, nope, I'm not doing it. And thinking, I have to close this chapter of my life because while I thought this is where I wanted to go, I now know that's not possible. And it took 2 years. But 2 years later, another company I would have never expected to call said, can you do it? And I said, but here's the thing, here's my terms. And I already have a feeling you're going to say no to this. And they did say no multiple times, but then eventually they came back and they said, yes, we'll do it. We'll do it how you said. And I went, wait a minute. I actually didn't have to make a choice. And for me, that was one of those, whenever I hear people who feel like they're in this impossible position, my life has been filled with situations where I've run into that impossible wall and you're like, there's just no way around it. And somehow I've always managed to figure out, nope, there is a way to do both and. There's always a way to do both and. As sometimes you just need the external perspective, sometimes you just need somebody to help you through it. But that moment in particular for me was a big one.
And life, especially once you're on an executive path, it's so much about trade-offs, right? Because just like you mentioned that at some point you were not ready to do it, but then eventually you found another opportunity where they were okay with you doing things in your own terms. So thinking about trade-offs, you, in so many of your conversations, you've often emphasized that leaders shouldn't have to choose between caring for their people and achieving strong performance. Could you walk us through a specific experience, maybe a high stakes project where you had to push back against a performance at all cost mindset and ensure that people's well being is number one priority?
Yeah, so there was a large organization that I was doing some work for who they firmly believed that you could not join the company if you didn't come to headquarters. It was part of that is what performance is. It's how you experience the culture. It's what you do. And they were really locked on that for an extended period of time. And of course, I've been around the block and gotten myself kicked in the teeth enough times to go, you don't just walk into that and go, you're wrong. So let me take you down this path. It doesn't go well that way. So I had to meet them where they were. But I remember the way I approached it with them was I allowed them to map out what their vision was and why they felt it was so important to do it the way they had planned. But then I started probing questions about what about how does this account for this challenge? Or what about with this person? Or what if we run into this situation? And they didn't have answers for it. And so I went through the exercise and I said, how about this? What if I build the backup plan for all the exceptions? You build the goal of what you want. I'll build the backup plan. And it was an intentional exercise because what I ended up doing was I took all the pain points that they had identified of why it was so important for everybody to have to physically show up to corporate headquarters. And I built this backup plan, capturing what they had said was critical, but presenting it in a different
Powerful.
alternative way. And we got to the end of the exercise, and I walked through a story of how my backup plan would support these people. And we're sitting there, and it got really quiet when I finished the story. And I remember the VP of the organization goes, is there any reason we wouldn't just have everybody do the option you just put together? I remember going, but I guess why? And I let him articulate back to me how what I had put together actually achieved all the outcomes in a vastly superior way than what they had originally problem solved. And I went along and I went, interestingly, I think you're right. I actually think we might want this to be the go ahead. And then these other ones can be maybe if there's an opportunity or things like that. And it worked. And this thing that was this impossible, there's just no way we have to do this. And I had talked to enough people in the organization to know this was a real pain point for a lot of people. And so it had historically been a real challenge. And here was this impossible. We have to make this. And it ended up being them that went, you know what I think we need to do? I think we need to be less tied to, and I just remember in the back of my head chuckling, going, yep, you're right. What a brilliant insight that you just had there. But they had to come to that conclusion. And I think that to me is one of the best examples I have where we saw this challenge that seemed impossible, but we were able to achieve it. And the program was wildly successful. And the interesting thing was they still did a lot of stuff at headquarters because my goal wasn't to say never do headquarters. My goal was to say, let's think bigger about what we're trying to achieve and what's the best pathway to get there.
Interesting perspective there. And did they eventually ask everybody not to come to headquarters, or what happened?
Yeah, some still did because the ones who were there, they did
Yeah,
it. But we built this hybrid experience that brought everybody together. And it was like, great. If you're there, fantastic. If you're not, you still get an extraordinary experience. Like it's not a dependency anymore.
great. And since you advise so many organizations on how, especially on their people culture, so how did this experience influence your approach when you advise leaders today? Or maybe and there's another experience that
Yeah.
shapes or drives how you advise people.
So I think this story and many of the other ones that I've had over the years, one of the things that we don't, just as people, we're really bad at, we're not good at imagining an experience outside of our own. And you'll see in the industry, there's labels that are attached to it. It can be stereotypes, it's bias, it's inherent bias. We have all these things, but at the end of the day, it's just we struggle to imagine an experience that isn't our own. And it's not nefarious. It's not necessarily people being bad and going, I'm trying to control and make everyone look like me. People don't typically think that way. They just, we just by default think that everybody's experience was like ours and everybody sees things the way we do. And rather than take this approach, and this is, I think, very intuitive to how I approach things now based on a lot of these things, rather than taking this approach of trying to convince people and argue my way into changing people's minds, I'm very inquisitive and I try and ask questions that make people think and actually step outside their own experience and go, I hadn't, I guess I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't really considered what that might mean. And when you start to do that, people can start to empathize much better. And once they can start to empathize and see an experience outside their own, it's not that they magically just go, okay, then let's do it, but they start to become more empathetic and open to ideas that they maybe weren't before. And again, it was because it's not that they were resistant because they were a bad person or hated thinking about other people. They just truly couldn't see the world differently than how they were seeing it. And I think that is largely one big thing I've taken that has helped me expand people's experiences.
So if I think of your playbook, it's basically you unbox people's minds and then they are at least able to split the difference or meet you halfway, and that's how
Yeah.
you take that forward.
And sometimes it's not only unpacking their minds, but sometimes they've never seen it repacked differently. And so when you unpack it and go, what if we packaged it this way? Suddenly they look at it and go,
I never thought about that.
wow, like I never even thought to do that. And you're like, huh, what if we did that?
Now you're there.
And then suddenly people start to see the world differently. And it's an amazing experience when you're able to do that.
Interesting. And since I'm in the consulting role, I'd love to be able to do that, but probably that's for the future. But in any case, my next question would be, since you mentioned how people have this box in their mind or they're very confined to, okay, the world is like this right now.
Yep.
With AI coming in, right? It's a big new thing. When leaders are ready to transform, or whenever they have a new idea, teams aren't always on board because as humans we resist change deeply. So from your perspective, what are the early warning signs that a team isn't prepared for AI driven shifts, and how do you guide leaders to address these human hurdles proactively whenever they're thinking of moving
Yeah.
towards AI?
So what's funny is this whole AI challenge is very much tied to what we just talked about. In that, again, some of the fear and resistance we're seeing to AI is because people are in this box and they've never seen outside the box and they've never had the box rearranged differently. And suddenly AI's coming going, I'm rearranging this box for you, whether you want to or not. And everybody's going, I am not okay with this type of a thing. And so some of the things that I look for in terms of readiness is how well do you understand the box you're in right now? Because if you don't understand the box you're in right now, you are extremely vulnerable to AI rearranging your box for you and in a way you actually don't like or actually is not good for you. Because while we'd like to think of AI as just this like alternative to us, it's an alien intelligence. It does not think and experience and behave the way we do. So the way it makes decisions is very different than us. And so what I see a lot of people struggling with, and part of the reason I get concerned when I hear people going, "Oh, we're going to do this with AI," is I'm like, but have you taken the time to understand your box? And have you taken the pieces out and examined the pieces and decided certain pieces they need to be in this box and they need to be in this box for a specific reason. And these over here, maybe we do need something that can help us think differently about these pieces, or maybe it can rearrange these pieces in a different way. And if you don't do, that's where not only do you run into resistance because people start just duct taping their box shut, but also you run the risk of building a box that is not going to help you get where you want to go. And I think that's where I see the resistance. And a lot of times that's where I end up leading people is instead of just going, where are we going to use AI? I'm like, where are we right now? And I think a lot of people, they don't know where they are right now. They're where they are because that's where I happen to be. But if you actually probe deeper and go, but why do you happen to be here right now? A lot of times it's, I don't know, because I am. And that is not, you're not ready for AI if that's your answer to that question.
No, absolutely. That makes total sense. And with AI, and we also have automation happening in many
Yeah.
industries, and it is often seen as a silver bullet, but it's not always the answer. And so how do you help the executive discern which processes should truly benefit from automation and where human insight should still lead the way? So how do you make that balance?
Yeah. So some of it has to do a lot of where my time is spent, I stay very close to where the technology's at. And so despite all the hype about AI, I'm intimately familiar with what it's really good at and what it's not really good at and where there's tremendous amounts of risk. So as an example, I was examining some research recently where in 1 to 5% of time, these big AI frontier models actually nefariously scheme and plot against its original intended goal. And it's okay, it's important to know that. Now, that doesn't mean, oh my gosh, the overlords are coming, we're dead. But it's important that you know that, because as you're deconstructing your thing, if there's something where a 1 to 5% chance that you might miss something could cost you the entire organization, you probably don't want to automate that. So some of it is understanding the technology and helping educate people about, hey, you may have heard this about it, but here's really how it works. And here's where it's strong and where it's not. So that's a big part of where I help people with that. The other part is really helping them understand what humans excel at. Because again, there's this idea of humans are just the same as AI. And so AI is more efficient and faster and doesn't need breaks and whatever. And so humans are less efficient. And it's no, that's actually not true. If you understand where humans excel and what humans are really good at, then you can learn how to surgically put the two pieces together. But I think I spend a lot of time really understanding what they're doing and then helping inform and educate how to make really smart decisions about it. That's honestly where I think some of the real important work has to happen.
So, what criteria or framework would you use when you're counseling leaders on these decisions?
It's funny because I think inherently a lot of people are like, what's the exact framework we follow to go through this process? And usually I'm like, there's not
There's no one
necessarily an exact
size.
framework that goes through, because
Yeah.
every experience I've been through has been dynamic. However, in the same sense, there are consistencies. There are consistencies of the frameworks of okay, you need to understand what you're doing. You need to do a risk assessment. That's honestly one of the biggest ones, is understanding the risk associated with the decisions. There's lots of decisions we make, they're inconsequential. They really don't matter. They are truly just routine things. And actually, that risk assessment framework, that's usually probably one where I spend a good chunk of time on this. And I think that I don't have this is Christopher Lynn's risk assessment, because again, every organization is different. But I think that risk framework and understanding what the framework is for every organization based on their values, their business, and their operations, that is one that usually I end up helping them define, so that as they go into things, they can choose, hey, this is in a category, almost here's the quadrant. This is in our no AI zone. This decision based on the risk framework we came up with, Christopher, this violates our policy of too high risk, too important for humans to be involved with. We don't touch it. This one is in this quadrant, and therefore it's up for grabs.
Got that. And when you're talking about AI, it's continuously evolving. And in fact, today I got this update that ChatGPT is now available on WhatsApp. It opens it up for so many other people who probably wouldn't have used the ChatGPT app
Yep.
or the website. So now, as AI continues to advance, we are seeing tools that are not only automating routine tasks, but also making creative, strategic decisions, and sometimes better than humans. So, how do you see this more sophisticated level of AI integration affecting the role of employees and leaders in modern organizations? And what should organizations do to ensure these systems enhance human talent rather than overshadow it?
Yeah. So even on this whole theme of deconstructing these complicated problems, I get really nervous when people say they're going to have AI make decisions for two reasons. One, that's dangerous territory. And two, even just from a legal compliance standpoint, AI cannot be held accountable. So someone's going to have this blow back on them at some point. So even when people say, oh, we're going to let AI make that decision, I'm like, if it goes wrong, just remember that's not a legally defensible excuse. So let's just make sure we understand when we're saying we're letting AI making the decision, we actually mean we're deciding and we'll be accountable for whatever decisions it makes. And suddenly when you frame it that
Correct.
way, a lot of times people are like, hang on, I don't want to be responsible for that. And you're like, you are whether you want to be or not. So I think that is a big part of it. But where I see it being really helpful for this kind of stuff is I just even think about myself where sometimes I'm faced with challenges where it's like there are quadrillions of possible options and things I can't possibly take into account. That's where AI is a fantastic thought partner to pressure test, to bring into the mix, to go, here's what we're thinking. Here's the data that we have. Patterns might we be missing? What considerations might not be in here? So that it's framing up to you and analyzing some of this stuff that you just wouldn't even have the human capacity in your lifetime to work through, ultimately so that it can feed to you what you need to make better decisions. So I actually think, even on the creative side, here's a good example of it. I have insane creative ideas in my head. I never was formally trained as a graphic designer. So I am physically incapable of creating some of the things that I would like to visually. So when I create my YouTube thumbnails, I could go into Illustrator or Photoshop and try and create something, and it would look like my 7-year-old daughter made it, and they'd go, what is that? But I also don't have the money to go hire a professional graphic designer to create custom thumbnails for everything. However, AI can help me create what's in my head and bring it to life in a way that would otherwise be formerly impossible. And I think those are examples of where you go, so do we make AI make all our images? I'm like, no, but might it in some cases, or might it bring out the best of who you are in certain situations? Yes. And I think that is how we should be looking at it, rather than, do we pick a human or do we pick an AI for this situation? That's an arbitrary, that's not the right question even to be asking.
Understood. And I think I absolutely agree with you on the point where you mentioned that you do not have that capacity to provide it enough context to make the decision. If you're a leader in an organization for at least 2, 3 years, then you have so much more information that you can possibly enter as a prompt for AI to make that decision for
Yep.
you. Totally agree with you. Now, not every leader comes from a technical background, right? And AI is a fairly new concept. Even for me, I'm barely 28 years old. Yet they must guide organizations through AI-led challenges. What traits or habits do you believe leaders, technical or not, must cultivate to confidently and ethically steer their teams into this evolving digital landscape?
I think, as I think about it, the good news for leaders, because I do talk to a lot of leaders that are like, I'm not technical, I'm not good at this. Like, how on earth am I supposed to navigate it? And I'm like, there are absolutely things that are consistent. And the good news is it's achievable by any leader. But I look at some of the things like, you do know how to think critically. So be a critical thinker. That's not going to go away because AI is coming. Your ability to contextualize and process these things and think around corners and what might happen and what questions am I not asking? Yeah, that's that's a skill that you're going to need in the AI future. I think about some of the other ones though with leaders where, and this is largely tied to the Industrial Revolution, but like with the Industrial Revolution, we saw leaders as just managing robots. Even though we had people in there, it was like you were a manager of robots. Make sure the widget is being made, make sure the thing is happening. And that, first of all, was never really a good way of leading in general. But as we move into the AI age, it's going to become even more important than but do you understand the human experience? Do you understand how these decisions and what these things are impacting? And are you thinking about what's going on in the dynamics of your team? Because regardless of how smart AI is or what AI is capable of doing, at the end of the day, what it's doing is with people and for people. And so you need to be thinking about that a lot. And I think that's one of those areas that I'm like, yeah, focus on those skills. In terms of the technical stuff, honestly, I tell people all the time, and this isn't just for my own job sustainability. I'm like, you need people who can come alongside who their focus is to focus on what is the technical capability? What can we do? Lean on those people. You focus on thinking critically about the context you're in and the people who are involved in that. And if you do that and then partner with the other folks, you'll be fine.
And we at What Fix, we've a lot of tech companies, we've launched so many AI features. And whenever I would introduce that to a customer, especially an executive or leader, then I'd see two sets. One would be like, we are very much interested in this. Let us know when we can get started. But the other set would say, oh, well, we have a full committee. We need to get this reviewed, security. How are you processing the data? That makes total sense that we don't have a choice. We need to embrace that. And sooner you get that through, you accept that, better it is. And
But on that topic, it goes a lot smoother if you've thought through why are we doing what we're doing and how are we doing it? Because the last thing you want to do is go to your CISO or your CIO and go, we're planning on using AI. And they go, on what? How? What do you, and you're like, we're going to use it everywhere. And they just go, oh my gosh, like this is a nightmare. It's you just made a bunch of really difficult situations for yourself that you didn't have to. Because if you came into it and said, we've taken apart the box, we're reconstructing the box, we believe we need it here, we're going to use it like this is how we're ensuring governance and we're making sure it's taken care of properly. I'm not saying it's going to be easier, but it's going to be 1,000 times easier than if you just go, hey, we're implementing AI. Can you sign off? That's just a recipe for disaster.
yeah, that makes total sense. But you need to show that you have a plan instead of
Yeah.
just saying blindly that, yeah, we're going to embrace AI as an organization. Maybe in the organization or the industry that you're in, it may not be as relevant, right? But I feel it's pretty agnostic. So since AI is so agnostic, if you look ahead next 5 to 10 years, how do you foresee AI and automation reshaping not just how we operate, but how we define meaningful work and long-term value? Do you envision a world where technology frees people to be more creative and fulfilled, or are there any potential pitfalls that we need to anticipate?
So going back to my very earlier point of the decisions we make today are going to affect us for generations to come. We, in this year and the next few years, the answer to your question of which is it going to be? Are we going to be more fulfilled and doing more important work? Or are we going to be more miserable and doing worse work? I'm like, that's a choice you get to make right now because I already am working with organizations who they are doing it the right way. And does it mean some jobs are going away? Yeah, it does. Some jobs don't exist anymore, but it's creating new opportunities and transferring people into doing more meaningful work in really essential ways. I think of a grocery store chain I did some advisory work with where, going back to your barista question, they were planning on moving to just automating checkout. And then as we dug into the human experience, we realized the grocery experience is not what the executives were thinking, which is everybody just goes to get their groceries and go home. No, some people, it's an experience for them. It's part of their social experience. And if you take that from them, you're going to lose market share to the grocery store that still has Gertrude, the checkout lady, who will sit and chit chat with them. And so we were actually able to create a whole value chain of options for customers to say, and then it created job chains because it's, do you want to be the Gertrude? And your lane is the slow lane where you just sit and chat with people and they're buying their groceries and it might take 45 minutes, but they don't care because that's their plan for the day. And that was incredible. But then I also see organizations that they're just, now people are just responsible for putting in chat GPT prompts and that's their job. It's this might relate. I'm a marketing person. I used to write really interesting articles for the company. Now I have a checklist of prompts that I throw into Gen AI and I just shell out 15 articles instead of one. And it's mind numbing, brainless work, but that's all I do. And I'm like, that's another path. And I think that can lead to people being even more miserable, even though we're creating more, we're not actually adding more value. And I think that's the inflection point every company's at right now.
And what would you recommend what should organizations start doing now to ensure they're prepared for these shifts?
I think probably the biggest shift is everyone right now is looking at where do we use AI? Where do we use AI? What should we be putting AI on? And my biggest piece of advice to people is go stop and ask yourself, where am I right now? Where are we right now? And what are we doing right now? And is everything we're doing actually all that important? Because there's a lot of really going back to the marketing, there's a lot of really useless work that you run the risk of wasting AI and energy and money and people's time on. That's what a cosmic waste of time. And so actually taking the time to understand where you are and what things are you doing that really matter and don't matter, and what things might you want to stop doing so you don't waste AI and people's time on something that isn't actually adding. I actually think that's the biggest thing companies can be doing right now. And you will quickly find that when you do that, it's not this old school mindset of spend the next 3 years deciding what you can pretty quickly get through that, and you'll find rapid opportunities to use AI to accelerate things. It's not a 3-year plan, but I actually think that's where people need to spend more time right now, honestly.
Just taking a step back and
Yeah.
planning how you want to achieve that. And it's an iterative process because if you have a 3-year plan, probably AI has advanced so much that all of your plans may not still be relevant.
There was a thing I
That
did with
makes
my teams twice a year. We would do an analysis of where we were and what things we were going to stop doing. And it was, and I've always done that. And my teams have always been like, why do we do this? And I'm like, because it's like your storage room. Over time, it just gets cluttered with crap that you don't even know why you put it in there. And you probably should have thrown it in the trash, but in the moment, it was more convenient to throw it in the storage room. And if you don't, and I saw this growing up in a funeral home, you end up with a pack rat room full of crap that nobody wants. And you're like, why did we spend all the time saving this?
got that. And yes, there's so many situations where it's so important to know what you shouldn't do than what you
Yep.
should do because you have all the advice in the world on what you should be doing, but there are very less advice on what you shouldn't be doing. But with that, we would end our podcast here. But I must say that this has been such an enlightening conversation, Chris. And this topic is very close to my heart because the world is changing. And I'm so glad that I got this opportunity. And also some of your insights on balancing AI and automation with human-centric approach have truly resonated with us. And it's clear that maintaining empathy and fostering genuine employee engagement are not just ideals, but achievable goals in today's tech-driven landscape. But in any case, I must say thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your experiences and wisdom. It's a fantastic way to keep the season 5 moving forward, purpose and depth. To all of our listeners, make sure you're subscribed to the Digital Adoptions Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share and leave us a review. Your support helps us bring more inspiring and insightful conversations your way. I'm your host, Mayank Arora, signing off. Until next time, keep embracing the future while staying true to what truly matters. Bye bye.